Humming is often the phonograph.
Good evening and welcome to another episode of What's So Funny, the show that probes the minds, the brains, and the psyches of the people who make the funny, or the people who bring you the funny. In this case, tonight, we're going to the movies. Our guest made headlines this summer when his film When Jews Were Funny won the Best Canadian Feature Award at the Toronto International Film Festival. When he came to our town, Alan Zweig was accompanying another film of his, 15 Reasons to Live, which played at the Vancouver International Film Festival. I haven't seen those ones yet, but I can't get enough of his highly personal Mirror trilogy of Vinyl, I Curmudgeon, and Lovable. If you want to get a start on those, if you haven't seen them, go to our What's So Funny blog, now available online, where I've posted Vinyl. It's his documentary from the year 2000 on record collectors. Really, it's about Alan Zweig, but ostensibly about record collectors. You'll thank me later, I know. I paid a visit to Zweig's hotel room, where we talked about his early unsuccessful work. He gives us a scoop, his unique illusion of structure in his films, and what it's like interviewing old Jewish comedy legends. Whoa, we don't need that. I went on a long time, didn't I? I did. All right, now here's my interview with filmmaker Alan Zweig. Alan, nice to meet you. But I feel like I know you.
How do you know?
Well, from your movies, and you're this open book, at least in the movies, and you must get this a lot. People think they know you. How much do we know you? Do we?
Yeah, I guess you do. I mean, it's funny actually. I was just I'm here in Vancouver, and I'm gonna show a film tonight, and there are people that were in one of my film Lovable that I did a lot of the people that are in Lovable were in Vancouver.
Yeah, it was filmed a lot here.
Yeah. The interesting thing about that, I don't know what it says, is that a lot of when I started asking people, it's just a fairly simple thing. Like, I'm doing a film about being single. Like, you're single, you want to be in it. People would say, like 90% of the women in Toronto turn me down. And so I have a friend here, Carlene, and I phoned and I said, like, can you ask some of your friends whether they'd be in the film about being single? And then she wrote me back and said, every woman I asked said, okay. It's like, okay, I'm coming to Vancouver.
Difference between Vancouver
In
and
Toronto, the stigma for women about being single was absent in Vancouver. So I ended up, there's like 7 or 8 women. Like, I was here for a week and I interviewed 7 or 8 women. And anyway, just now, I was thinking I might see this 1 or 2 tonight. So I put the film on to look at the credits to remember their name. Like, I'm not very good at names.
Right.
I just don't remember names. But but in order to get to the credits, I ended up watching the last 3 or 4 minutes of the film, which is me. And it actually was very emotional to see this thing the stuff that I said, like,
where you were in your life
Yeah,
then.
yeah.
Yeah. Funny, I was at my son's cross country race yesterday, and there was a woman standing there, mother obviously, and I thought, I wanted to go up and say, "Were you in the movie Lovable?"
yeah,
She reminded me of somebody in there. It could have been. I don't know.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, so you reveal a lot of yourself in your movies, but is there parts where you just go, I'm not gonna.
I think there are
touch that.
Well, every one of my films, every one of those films that I was in, the Mirror films, I intended, not maybe Vinyl, but in both I Curmudgeon and Lovable, I tried to record a piece about my body issues, about my being overweight and my really horrible self-consciousness. And in both pieces, I think I lived in the same apartment when I made both those films. But anyway, I was basically, this hotel is another perfect example. It's like, I don't like mirrors that much, but I certainly don't like a mirror on 3 sides of me when I get out of the shower. And I have to, like, I have to avert my eyes, and I'm very good at averting my eyes. I just can't ruin my day to walk out of the shower and just like, whoa,
Yeah.
there it is.
Is that something that's always been with you, or just as you get older?
No, it's I don't know. I haven't been overweight my whole life, so it's something that crept up on me, and then I realized one day, and then I realized how much I. It's weird. I think when it comes to my weight, I'm either in total denial or total exaggeration of how bad it is. Nothing. There's no. It's like when I walk around thinking I'm just like everybody else, kind of, you know. And then I look at myself, and then when I look at myself, I think I look, like gigantic and horrible. And how could anybody, even be with me? And then they say, "Oh no, yes, you're overweight, but you're not,
Yeah.
whatever." And
You
then
don't stand out.
and then it's like, oh, but yeah. So that's always been there.
I find as I'm getting older, it's not so much mirrors, but photos. You look at it and you go, that's not right.
Well,
That can't be.
yesterday I reunited with a guy that I grew up with and went to high school with, but most significantly, he and I and another guy in Vancouver that I'm going to see on Sunday went to India together in 1973 and had a very, very significant, life-changing adventure. So he's 62 and I'm 61. And every occasion in which I meet somebody like that I knew back then, when I first see them, I don't recognize them, and then it takes me about 10 minutes, and I'm I don't know what the word is, shocked by what they look like. After about 10 minutes, I start to be able to see the person I
the old
knew,
person,
the
yeah.
face in there, and I can't imagine that it isn't the same for me.
When they see you?
When they see me, or even now, like I say, I just looked at myself in Lovable, and that's 2006. That's 7 years ago. And my conclusion is that up until about 50, you can be mistaken for 40, 45, whatever. But from after 50, it's exponential. Like when you get to 60, you look like an old man no matter what. And it's shocking, especially since I have a 3-year-old, well, 2.5-year-old daughter. So,
Yeah. Well, and that's shocking and amazing.
yeah.
And great. But when I see somebody who's my age who looks a lot older, I don't think, hey, I'm doing pretty good. I resent them for reminding me of how old I really am.
Yeah. Well, I do have the experience. I've had the experience a few times with my wife where I'll run into somebody and then I'll say, she'll go, "You went to school with them?" And yeah. And she says, "Wow, they really look, you don't look as old as they do." Like, I can't believe
She's looking out for you.
how old they look, not you. I really do. Yeah. I think we're in denial about aging because, people are like 60 is the new 40. No,
No,
60 is
exactly.
60 is the new 58 maybe, but
You so I've seen the trilogy.
right.
Now I don't know if you call it that or if that's just a media construct.
No,
Uh,
that was purposeful. After I made vinyl, I thought, well, I'll do this one more time and see how it works. And then after I did Ikermajin, I said, okay, I can't keep, I don't want to keep doing this forever. Although, because I didn't want to I don't want to make it a gimmick. Like if, that next thing he's talking about, well, I could have done another one about being fat, a fourth one.
mhm.
And I could have done another one about being Jewish. But at that time, I definitely would not do that. Like there's no way I'm going to make a film about being Jewish. That's how I felt.
Because
I just thought, who cares? Like I don't really like, in particular, I don't like people. I don't like, I guess I
People.
think there's too much foregrounding of cultural identity, period. There's too much cultural pride, really. I just don't, I believe like there's nothing to be proud of. It's like, I think it should all be changed to not ashamed of, gay, not ashamed, or something like that. Because pride is
it.
ridiculous.
that's right. Norm Macdonald was telling me on this show. It's ridiculous. It's like saying I'm proud of my green shirt.
Right. Well, also the thing about proud of being gay is you can have pride apparently about an accomplishment.
Yes.
But the thing is, you can't argue that I was born gay, I had no choice, and then say I'm proud of it. Proud of it implies that you made it. If you made the
You
choice,
made the right
If you
choice.
made the right
Yeah.
choice, and you're good at it, I'm very good at being gay, maybe you could be proud. But if you're arguing that it's just you want gayness to be seen as just another slice in the giant pie of human experience, then don't be, proud. But at the same time, yes,
Don't be ashamed. Yeah.
since you were once asked to be ashamed, I'm really glad you're not ashamed. But I really don't like the word pride, and I think that's a Jewish thing in me that I don't like the word pride. I think it's also it's not that I'm never proud. I do allow myself some pride because I think it would be sort of ungenerous if I just outlawed pride from my entire experience. But I think a lot of it had to do with all the years in which I was a failure and in which I was surrounded by other struggling artists who, nonetheless, unlike me, were extremely proud of their accomplishments. Like, it was just a lot of pride. People are proud that they're a filmmaker. I'm just proud that I'm a filmmaker. Like, why?
But you're proud of your works, your babies, aren't you?
I wasn't. I mean, on somewhat, yeah, again, it's almost like I can only summon the sort of lack of negative emotion. Like, my worst nightmare, I don't want to make a horrible film. I don't want to be walking around having made a horrible film and nobody's telling you it's a horrible film. Because I've known people that have made horrible films.
You can't tell them.
And you can't tell them. And it's like, so that's sort of my greatest nightmare. And it's like, somehow all the years I was struggling, well, first of all, I made some bad films. So that's the first thing. And then it's like, I thought I should get out, even though all the years that I was struggling and not doing well, and no, it was nobody's fault but mine. But yeah, I mean, the world is against you, but the world's against everybody. So some people manage to figure out how to get around and some people don't. And I didn't. But
Until vinyl?
And vinyl was like, I don't know, it was like the world saying, like everybody thinks they're talented. So you thinking you're talented is meaningless, So it was just like, I didn't want to do this if I wasn't good at it. One of my favorite stories is I was in Winnipeg just like 2 years ago. And do you know who Dave Barber is?
Dave Barber
is a saint. I just feel like I like to say that out loud. Dave Barber runs a Cinematheque in Winnipeg.
Yeah,
He's
no,
like one of the great supporters of film and filmmakers in the world. Is like Winnipeg is incredibly lucky to have Dave, and so he booked this little retrospective of my whatever, it was just my 4 documentaries at that point. And so since I was there, kind of like night after night, I decided to do intros that sort of take in all the background. So I must have given some sort of intro to vinyl about, all the years of failure and blah, 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 blah. And then just as I was about to quit the business, I just sort of made this thing that I didn't really care what anybody thought. And then that was vinyl. So afterwards in the lobby, these 2 younger guys, obvious like film fan guys, and I guess fans of mine, were talking amongst themselves. And then one of them came over, like he's the one who worked up the courage to come and talk to me. And he said, we were wondering if you had had success before you made vinyl, would you have made vinyl? And I was like, oh, like no way. That just wouldn't have happened. And he said, I knew it, meaning to him and his friend, all my 20 years of struggle were completely worth it for them because I made this film they loved. So in a weird way, that's what I think about that a lot. It's like, it doesn't, it's true. In a weird way, to have made one film that a kid like that, who is like a kid like I was,
right,
loves.
So what led you to making vinyl? So you'd made films in the past. You said they weren't good. Were they documentaries?
No, I made 2 films at film school and 3 films between film school and vinyl. The second film I made at film school was good. The film after that, called Where's Howie, wasn't good. Then the next film I made was a short called Stealing Images. It was good. And then the next film I made was a feature, which I won't even name.
Come on.
Well, it's called The Darling Family. Okay, so basically what happened was I was writing all these scripts and getting sometimes funding to develop them. And they were all in a certain style that was personal. The kind of thing I was doing was kind of middle class, angst, neurotic, but also sort of dark and crime and guns and killing. And like I wrote a thing about a guy who an older Canadian sort of one of these older guys that does a travelogue show, kind of like Gordon Pinsent, but like crossed with Mr. Rogers, some guy like that. And in Toronto, we had this guy, Bill Brahma's Ontario.
Oh,
Bill
yeah.
Brahma was like 80, and he was like boring as hell.
Like
And
Rick Steves.
and we'd do this 5-minute thing about the taffy pole and move on. So I did this thing called Fork in the Road about a show like that, a behind the scenes, like Larry Sanders kind of
Right.
Fork in the Road, about the show Fork in the Road, but the guy, Rick Steves or Bill Brahma, was actually a serial killer. Every town he went to, the only way he could take the pressure of this horrible shit that he had to do was to kill somebody.
Great premise.
And anyway, so all those things that I was trying to do, and it was the era of serial killers. So all the things I was trying to do, I never got funding for them. And then I knew there was a playwright in Toronto, Linda Griffiths, who was somewhat famous, and she had this play, The Darling Family, about abortion, and it was a two-hander. And it shouldn't have been a film. Like, it just was not cinematic at all. But I thought, based on her name, we could get some money. And on some level, I had given up trying to get my own films made. Now, if I had used the same effort to get one of my own scripts made as I did to get essentially her film made, this uncinematic, indoor, two-hander, very poetic, emotional, but not, I don't know. I stopped believing in myself. I put my belief with somebody else. I was like everybody thought I was a writer director who was gonna, do his own
Create your own.
thing. But I didn't. I was just so beaten down. I felt so beaten down that I stopped believing in myself, and I went and made somebody else's film. And at the same time, we went down and made this film for like $25,000, and we inspired like Jeremy Podeswa and John LeQuier to make their first features for nothing. And Jeremy made Eclipse, and John made I can't remember, but it was about the heroin addict or something like that. And their careers just took off because they did classic indie films of their own thing. And I did this thing that should have been like a PBS.
Right. Wasn't your vision.
It wasn't my vision, wasn't my anything. And it just came out, and it was like, people that knew me just shook their heads. And it was like if I'd been hired to do that by CBC and got paid well, but it was sort of like my film, but not my film. And I was just like, oh. I've never talked about this in public before. I just ignore that film. I do say that I made a horrible decision based on not believing in myself, and I thought I got to quit.
You beat yourself up over it.
I have to get out of the business, so to speak. Not that I was really in the business. And then what happened was, I had applied for a grant to do another fiction film. I had a sort of a cool idea, I thought, about and sometimes I think I should still try to make this. It was about a guy who had like 10,000 records, a story based on obvious things, stories that I'd heard about people. And so I wrote a story about a guy who had 10,000 records, and he tells his wife that he's going to sell them all, get rid of all of them. And then he goes away for a weekend, and she sells them all, not knowing that there were 10 that he would have never gotten rid of ever in his life, like 10. And so he goes to the store where he sold them, and those 10 went right away. And he goes out trying to get those 10 records back. So I applied for a grant, and I got money to do that. I got $30,000. And I just thought, if I start to write this script, maybe I can live on that $30,000 for 2 years, but at the end of 2 years, I'll have no money and I'll have a script that nobody will let me make the film. Like nobody's ever going to fund one of my films, no matter how good the script is. And at the same,
Do you think that's true, or that was just your belief at the time?
I think that was true at the time. I think, yeah, I think that was true at the time. In the meantime, I had seen a film. I'd seen some rushes from a film that Nick Sheehan, who now lives in Vancouver, was making. And it was shot on this Canon video camera, high 8 camera. And the camera had this quality. I mean, it's technical. It's like when you hit the gain, it gave video noise, and the noise looked like grain. It just had
The noise looked like
yeah,
grain.
Yeah, it just had the quality of this camera that if you looked at the image and you said to somebody, "This is Super 8 or something," for a second you'd be like, "It didn't." I mean, it just didn't scream video.
Hmm.
And as film people, we were like, I hated video. I hated the way I looked. Obviously, I mean, everybody remembers that when the way film looked versus video was like a no-brainer. But this was the first time I saw video that I thought, "Oh, I could live with that."
Right.
So I went out and bought a camera for $1,000, and then I just started making the. I just said, I'm just going to make the film. I'm going to make the nonfiction version of this fictional story, and I'll start that by talking about my record collecting. And I just started. You know, it took me a few days and a few attempts before I figured out how to do that. This mirror thing would work, and you see at the beginning of vinyl, I started in the bathroom mirror, because that was the only mirror it didn't occur to me to put a mirror somewhere. Just like, where's a mirror in the bathroom? So I started filming myself in the bathroom, and then I realized I have to stand, and I have to put the camera in front of my eye. And this
it shows you fumbling around,
right,
trying to figure it out.
And then I figured it out, and then I started doing it, and then for about 2 weeks, I was like, oh my God, this is not going to be another script in the drawer. I'm making a movie. And so it was like, nobody hired me to do this. It's a grant. I'll just keep shooting till that money runs out, and then I'll look for more money for editing, if maybe, or I'll edit it for the next few years. I'm not going to do, like, I don't know what else I'm doing. It's way more fun to be, and it was just as cheap as writing a script, basically, because the camera was $1,000, and I didn't have a crew. I just I put the camera on a tripod, and I bought a couple of lavaliers, and I clipped them onto people, and that's that sort of my style, that you can see the thing hanging out, but I just, like, I didn't care. I didn't think that would be an issue, and I still don't.
That is so true. I love documentaries, and I don't care what kind of documentaries they are. I'm a sucker for them, except for the overly stylized ones. Like, I just want the meat and potatoes. This is compelling stuff. These people talking and you
Right.
talking. Like, but you kind of developed your style as you were going along, right?
Oh, I wouldn't
was
say
by
I
accident?
No, yeah,
No.
it was accident, definitely by accident. I mean, the funny thing about developing quite a style by accident is that then people start pointing out to you what you're doing, and then you might fall into the trap of trying, oh, I'm doing that. How should I do that better? Or something like that. Like, I have gotten many, 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 many compliments about what a good interviewer I am. I'm not a good interviewer in the sense that, as much as I'd love to retire and, like, whatever, take over John Gomeshi's job or something like that, when you go to the CBC and Matt Galloway and Metro Morning, or I was on Cuba with Kevin Sylvester, etc. Those people, and then I was on
He's
a
good
show
too.
And Brant Banbury.
Yeah.
Those
Heard
people
that
that go live to air, they're good. They're really, really good. They've seen your film. They ask good questions. They don't interrupt you. They make it easy for you to answer. That kind of interviewing I would suck at. But the kind where I talk to you for 3 hours and then I use 10 seconds, I'm really good at that. And because,
So wait,
I'll do anything, because I'll do anything to get those 10 seconds. Why else? Whatever.
as you hear them, you're going, that's the 10 seconds right there.
Sometimes.
It's
Yeah. I mean,
afterwards.
there's, you know what it is. Sometimes there are just like gifts from God, and inside you're like, oh my God, this is going to be so great.
Mhm.
Like, at the end of When Jews Were Funny, something occurs that at the time I didn't know I'd use it as the ending, but everybody in the room knew
Oh,
this is unbelievable.
can't wait to see that one.
Yeah, of course, definitely. In A Hard Name, the ex-con film, definitely there were moments where you just had to where my breath was taken away, and I just had to pretend that it wasn't taken away. Yeah, but anyway, all I'm saying is that I've had a lot of compliments about my interviewing style, but the thing is,
By the subjects or by people watching
by
the
people
films?
watching the
Yeah,
films.
the subjects
Actually-
are going, what, 3 hours and there's 10 seconds here?
my favorite non-compliment that I ever got was my friend Joey, who works at CBC as a researcher and producer. And he told me, what's great about your interviewing style is that you break all of, and then he named a guy. So there's a guy, I don't know if he lives in Toronto, but he comes to Toronto. He's the Robert McKee of interviewing.
Who's Robert McKee?
Robert McKee is a guy who wrote a book about screenwriting that became, unfortunately, the Bible of everybody deciding whether you get to make a film, not necessarily everybody trying to make a film. Robert McKee just basically said, this is how you write a script. This has to happen at page 3.
Right,
This has
right.
to happen at page 10. He wrote a few books. He does seminars. Everybody that worked at the government film agencies took these seminars and came back and said, how come you're not doing that thing Robert McKee said?
How
So-
dare you introduce a character on page 32?
Yeah. So what's your inciting incident? Even the thing is, when I started making film, nobody ever said story arc,
Oh, really? When you started
character arc.
in
nobody-
film school?
Yeah. Nobody ever said in a documentary, tell me about your characters. I don't have any characters. That's why I can't pitch a documentary, because they'd ask about my characters. And
So you
I'd
just
be like,
make it and then
Yeah.
show them what you got.
Yeah. Oh. Anyway, so there's a guy, Robert McKee, and there are a few guys that wrote screenwriting books, but
Yeah,
Robert McKee's in the film adaptation. That's about Robert McKee. The
Ah.
screenwriting guru in adaptation was, everybody knows about that, knows that he's Robert McKee's taken off on. Okay, so there's an interview guy, and I don't know what his name is, but he's the interview guru. And actually at CBC in Toronto, if you get a job and they're going to, they give jobs to people at CBC in Toronto who you were a musician, but now you're going to be an interviewer.
Exactly. Everybody has.
So I'm friends with Grant Lawrence. I don't think he took this course, but maybe he did. But he's your Vancouver equivalent of somebody who was a musician. And I'm not putting him down. I'm just saying, you guys, maybe Vancouver, they do the same thing.
Mhm.
Anyway,
It's not
so
fair.
they
Not
get
fair.
sent to this guy, and he teaches them how to interview. And he has rules. So let's say his name is Joe Schmo. So my friend Joey said, you break all of Joe Schmo's rules. And that is kind of weird. Like, you don't want to know what rules there are. I don't even want to know. But he just intrigued me, and I said, what do you mean? He said, well, Joe Schmo says ask open questions, and you ask closed questions. Okay, what do you mean? Well, Joe Schmo would say, if you said, my mother just died, Joe Schmo would say, what you should say is, how does that make you feel? Whereas you, Alan, would say, oh, that must make you feel like shit. And I'm like, yeah, okay. I'm never going to say, how does that make you feel? After you tell me you were, sexually abused.
Yeah.
Well, how does that make you feel? Like, I understand the idea of open question. In other words, they could say, actually, pretty good. Like,
You're getting honest human reactions from, like it's a conversation. It's
right.
an interaction.
Another good example would be your questions are being heard. Okay, so you know that if your questions aren't heard, you have to ask me to answer things totally different. Alan, what'd you have for breakfast? I can't say toast. When I ask you, Alan, what have you had for breakfast? The answer is, for breakfast, I had toast, because otherwise you can't cut out your questions.
Mhm.
You
See that in documentaries a lot. Too.
Right. So
Yeah.
you have to. It's almost like if you cut out. Maybe I'm being kind of obscure, but if you know you're going to cut out your questions, then your interview subjects have to become actors, right? They can't.
That's right. Yeah.
What'd you have for breakfast? Toast. No, say it again. This morning for breakfast, I had toast. Okay. And then they say it. Oh, okay. And then, you ask them a yes or no question. They go, yes. You go, no, say it again.
Repeat the
Repeat
question
the
and the
question
answer.
and the answer.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't do that because,
It takes them out.
right. So I didn't purposely set out to have a style in which I wouldn't take people out of the interview and make them remember that they're being interviewed. But that is basically my style. And sometimes I include my questions and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I tell a story for 10 minutes because they're not talking and they'll go, and then they go, like, who's being interviewed here? And I'm like, be my guest. Like, go ahead. It, it's funny because it's just like, I have twice, I've been asked to twice in the next couple of months, once teach a master class, and then this other one, he wants me to teach people how to interview and do an interview live. And I'm like, I can't do it. Like,
You
I
don't want to
can't.
give away your secret.
No, it's not that I want to give
No.
away my secrets. My secret is just talk to the
Just
person.
be a human being.
Just talk to them and don't have a list of questions. Don't have paper in front of you going, because if you have paper in front of you, at a certain point, you're going to be going, looking away to see what the next question is. Don't have an agenda at all, just take your chance.
Yeah, you take a chance, but you might forget something that you wanted to ask if you don't write it down.
Well, if you have one thing that you really want to ask and you can memorize it so well that you are able to ask it at the end or something like that, maybe you could do that.
But doesn't it also help in your films? The impression I get, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that a lot of these people are your friends. And so there's a relationship with them already that they trust you.
No, I think that's
No?
incorrect.
Okay.
I think that over the course of, let's just take my first 4 films. I would say the 4th film, The Ex-Cons, I mean, I knew a couple of them before I interviewed them, but none of them were my friends.
Okay.
There are people in each film that are friends of mine, but it's never been the majority.
Okay.
But no, I think it's almost like I developed a style to match a style of filmmaking, a style of storytelling. It's not like I said, well, I'm going to be doing it like this, so I should make films like that. But it's just everything, one of my favorite subjects about filmmaking and filmmaking conventions versus filmmaking mistakes is intercutting. A lot of films are made somewhat like this. I'm going to ask 10 people the same 10 questions, and then I'm going to just intercut their answers. I would say it's almost impossible to make a good film if you do that, and yet that's what a lot of people do. Now, I don't do that. I ask 10 people, whatever comes up, I'm asking them all vaguely in the same realm of things, but I'm not asking them the same 10 questions. Now, you go to the editing room and you wish you'd ask them all the same questions because that would be easy.
Thematically, yeah.
But so instead, we have to find ways to go from this person talking about bouillabaisse to that person talking about, their mother, and make it just seem like both of them are talking about the same thing. And we accomplish that through filmmaking.
Mm-hmm.
It's a rhythm, it's cutting, it's music. And so that's what we developed. We developed a style where, like a jigsaw puzzle, we put it together so everybody feels like there's an inevitability going from person A to person B, but that inevitability isn't based on, I met Joe in 1976. I met him in 1985. Like, we don't do that.
And you're saying we as in
We, myself and my editors that I work with.
Right.
Most people do what I just said.
Yeah. Well, that's why yours stand out.
Yeah,
I guess
it's true. Most people don't know. They don't know what I'm doing, and they don't know that they can do what I'm doing. So they do things that they hedge their bets by making everything the same before they even get to the editing room. So it'll be really easy. I mean, this is Not true of all of them, but
Sure.
it's true of a lot of them.
It's the Hollywood system too.
And it's like when I made vinyl with my editor Chris Donaldson, we discovered this thing, which was what we call the illusion of a structure. That through use of various filmmaking techniques, but mostly editing and rhythm, and one guy's shouting, one guy's whatever. You end on a laugh, the next guy shouts. It sort of sounds like they kept talking. Take the sound, pull it back under the guy. Put music on the cue so that it just feels like, oh, that's the next thing. This person could be talking about that, and that person could be talking about something totally different, but it feels inevitable. And it's like you throw all the balls up in the air, and you just keep them there. And after a while, and then the film ends, and people feel like they've been on this journey, and they have been, even though on some level nobody was talking about the same thing.
And it's also a structure, you're saying, without it being overtly obvious that there is this structure underneath it, holding it together.
Yeah, Chris made up this phrase, idea clusters. Can we find some spot where at least two people are talking about the same thing, or maybe three people are talking about the same thing, because at least that'll be easy to cut because they're all talking about the same thing. And we almost never did an idea cluster because it's getting overly technical. But I find that most films, if you have 20 people in the film or 10 people in the film, they don't let them talk very long at any one moment. Like nobody's on screen talking for longer than 30 seconds.
In most films.
Yeah. Whereas I don't do that. That's not, to me, I let people talk for 2 minutes maybe. Or there's, and When Jews Were Funny, Simon Rakoff comes in almost when the film is over, but he had 3.5 minutes, which is huge, So it's why that's hard to do an idea cluster, because he's not going to talk about the same thing for 3.5 minutes,
Yeah.
Sometimes I do let what person says last and what the person says first be similar. And, when you do that, that's like a gimme. That's like, I'm tired of doing that other thing. That's too hard. Let's just do one of those easy ones.
Right.
But, it always works out because everybody in the film is human, and we're all talking about sort of the same thing all the time. And
exactly,
yeah. So
it's so personal for each individual and for you, and yet, so universal. And I guess that's what makes it universal. Is, I'm not a record collector. I sit there fascinated. It was really the first hoarders.
Right.
The fact that you have so many people, a lot of documentaries, you see four people over and over.
You read my mind. When I made vinyl, the only thing I had in my mind was, there's not going to be just three. Because I'd seen, I don't know, like dozens of films where whatever it was, it's about comedians. We'll meet three comedians. Yeah. Record collectors, we'll meet three record collectors. Part of it for me is, you meet them, you kind of get who they are. For me, let's move on. Because we're not going to really get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like, if I'm not going to really get to know them, then I don't need a half hour of them.
But there's also truth in the sheer numbers, because I see three and I go, well, that's, 3 people really.
Yeah.
But when they just keep coming and coming throughout.
Right. See, that was the other thing about vinyl, is that I wanted to impress upon people that it's much more common than you think. Nobody knows what goes on behind closed doors. That, you probably know a record collector. You just don't know you do, because they keep it private. But anyway, yeah, that was. I think there's like 40 people I think there's something like 40 people in vinyl.
Really, yeah, and also almost to a person, they would be like, "Yeah, no, I know the freaks. That's not me though."
Yeah.
and also in I Curmudgeon, it's everyone calls me negative, but I think I'm funny. I am not negative. But yeah,
we haven't talked about comedy yet.
I know we're going to. But these films are so great, and you can see them online. I don't know how that helps you at all.
It doesn't. I don't know where. Like some of them are on YouTube.
Vinyl is on YouTube.
Yeah.
I saw the other two on a documentary site.
Oh, you know what? I'm going to give you a gift.
What?
I'm going to give you the alternate take.
Oh, sweet.
It's. We made it as a DVD extra, but we never made a DVD. My editor and I cut a completely. It's not an editor's cut. Not like a director's cut. It's a 90-minute film with completely different footage than is in vinyl.
Oh, incredible.
And it's actually the joke for me. The joke about vinyl, the alternate take, is it's the film that is about record collecting, because vinyl, in a sense, was about me, but this one is about record collecting, which is why I think it's a little bit boring. But I think fans of vinyl would like it. Also, because there's 2 or 3 characters in vinyl they'll be glad to see again, like the K-Tel guy and the guy whose wife took all his records in his divorce and things like that.
I want to see, well, in all your documentaries, I want to see another documentary with just bringing back those people. Where are they now?
Right.
What did they think of you and how you portrayed
vinyl.
them?
Vinyl, you would find the most mad, angry people.
Because they felt, some of them, well, you included that, they felt set up.
Yeah.
Like, you were here to talk about my record collection, and
Right.
you're psychoanalyzing me.
Yeah, that's right.
That was...
And there's a lot of anger from the documentary film community, which I experienced at first, to the point that I assumed all record collectors felt that way. But actually, I've been to many, many record shows, and that's a small minority that hate it. Most record collectors do like it.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, it was. I was very proud. Pitchfork did the top 20 music documentaries of all time, and vinyl was on the list. I wouldn't even consider it a music documentary, but what I say about vinyl is, it's sort of the same thing I say about When Jews Were Funny. If I can impress upon you that When Jews Were Funny is not a history of Jewish comedians in any way, go into the film knowing that it's not a film about a history of Jewish comedians anyway, then it's kind of. And vinyl is not about record collecting, but at the same time, there's tons about record collecting in it. And if you love records, you'll just love seeing people holding up their records. You'll love looking at their rooms with their records behind them. Like, it'll make you, if you're...
Why isn't there a DVD out? That would sell, I would imagine, especially with the
I
extras.
don't know. I don't know why. I mean, you know what? One of the reasons there's no DVD out is because at the time I made it, I never thought anybody would see anything I made, which they hadn't so far. So any number of things that I probably should have put in place in order to make a DVD happen, I didn't have in place. And then there were just years afterwards where I just didn't. It took me years to realize that people wanted to see it, and that it was a cult film. And then at that point, I just
You
thought,
think it's too late?
oh, it's probably too late to make money on it, but it's probably not too late to make it. And just, I suppose if I still might someday.
Yeah.
With the alternate take, I still might someday.
Now, which brings us to When Jews Are Funny, which just won Best Canadian Feature.
Not doc, feature.
Feature.
Better than all the fiction films made by some of Canada's best filmmakers.
In your face, Don McKellar.
Yeah.
I don't know, was he up for it?
He was up for it, actually. Don was
He always is.
Don was very happy I won. He actually sent me an email that said, "Yay, now, no more whining."
Well, it's funny because you said that you thought it was your least successful film.
Yeah.
Do you still feel that way?
No, I don't.
Or your worst film?
I have to accept. No, this is what I would say. It's hard to explain. But okay, if we're going to talk about that film, then this is what I would say. I wanted to make a personal film. I wanted to make a personal film in the same way that Vinyl and I Curmudgeon and Lovable were personal. I wanted to make a film about my feelings about being Jewish. Now, if in the logical way to make that film in the same way I'd made those other films would be to interview a bunch of people like me who may or may not feel similar to me. But I wanted my cake and eat it too, kind of, because so the first thing I decided was if I wanted to talk about being Jewish, what was the most effective focus that really did represent what I felt about being Jewish and what I felt was missing when I looked around at Jews today, and I decided it was humor. So now that I had, okay, so I was going to focus on being Jewish and the humor, well, maybe, it's sort of like I saw, the aristocrats and things like that. And it's like maybe I could make that film, but with those kind of people. Okay, so I'm going to make a film about me and my attitude towards being Jewish, but instead of making it with people like me, I'm going to do it with people that couldn't be less like me, professional comedians who, the older ones, as it turns out, have very little insight about their Jewishness, like in a certain way, like all those. I mean, you'll have to see the film, but like all those people that I watched on Ed Sullivan as a kid, and my parents said, "He's Jewish, he's Jewish, he's Jewish, he's Jewish." When you say, "Was your comedy Jewish?" No, which is ridiculous, actually, just total denial. So
You
anyway,
mean your personal comedy, the comedy you watched, or
no, I'm saying like if you say,
if
I have to believe that Alan King, who was, or Buddy Hackett, who were my father's favorites,
yeah.
knew that their rhythm, their anger, their whatever was Jewish. Or maybe
Well, because they were.
not just because they were, but because maybe they, I don't know. Like I'm saying, they might not have had any historical, whatever, distance. Maybe, I don't know. But I'm just saying, like, this is what was difficult about the film. I wanted to say, when I was growing up, Jews were funnier, number one. Number two, by the way, that generation of Jews I'm talking about pretty well ended up inventing what we now think of as North American comedy. So let's talk about that a little bit, because after all, I'm going to be talking to Shaggy Green, so why not? But mostly, I want to hear Shaggy Green talk about how funny his father was, or his grandfather, who were from Eastern Europe.
And did you get that from those older comedians?
No.
No. You
No,
tried, obviously.
I tried. I got a bit from Shelley Berman, but I had to squeeze it out of him.
Why do you think that is? Oh, how does that make you feel?
Why do I think it is?
Yeah, why do you think that is?
Well, my theory, your theory is as good as mine. I think that they come from an era in which it wouldn't help them to admit they were to talk about being Jewish, and so it's sort of like, well, now you could admit it, but no, they can't. Maybe, or because they made a clear dividing line in their head between Jewish and not Jewish. Jewish was talking Yiddish, telling a little Jewish joke, doing a little accent. What Myron Cohen, if you remember him.
Yeah, I was just going to say,
Right.
too bad he's not alive.
Myron Cohen and Sam Levinson, they were overtly Jewish as long as and they're like, I'm sure Alan King and Buddy Hackett and Shaggy Green thumbed their noses at what Myron Cohen did. So they're like, well, I wasn't Myron Cohen. Well, who cares? Whatever.
Because they were performing to the masses. Is that
they were all performing to the masses. Norm Crosby says,
is he Jewish?
Yeah, he's Jewish.
Who knew?
His comedy was actually the least Jewish.
Yeah.
But still, he says
Malaprops.
we couldn't in the Midwest. They never saw a Jew. We couldn't be Jewish. We couldn't be Jewish to them. They changed their names, and they just couldn't be Jewish. And Shelley Berman would say, well, there's a rhythm. He's like, there's a rhythm to those guys. Set up, punch, set up, punch, set up, punch. I didn't do that. And I'm like, okay, but let's say I put you in the category with Woody Allen, Lenny Bruce, Mort Saul. Shall I continue? All Jews. You were in the Compass Players with Mike Nichols, Elaine May. Shall I continue? All Jews.
It didn't even occur to him?
No, he would just be like, there were Italians, there were Irish. I'm like, who? Just like whatever.
Bob Newhart?
Yeah, Bob Newhart, whatever. Yeah, there's Bob. Well, first of all, you can't. I'll just tell you right now, something I wish that somebody had told me.
Yeah.
If you ever interview Shelley Berman, don't mention Bob Newhart.
Oh, because he stole the.
Well, whether he stole it or he didn't, yeah.
He still holds on to that.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
it's
The phone. We're talking about the
phone
phone
thing.
call. Yeah.
I mean, Shelley Berman didn't exclusively do phone calls. He did a couple of famous ones, maybe even only one famous one where a son phones his father, or he wants to go to acting school. But yeah, I made a mistake of mentioning Bob Newhart in a positive, like I was comparing him positively to Bob Newhart, but it was like, slowly I turned.
Oh, he didn't go off on it. He just withdrew.
He just, yeah, it was like, well, I didn't know we were going to talk about that horrible, whatever. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I'm saying is,
Bob Newhart didn't sit on a stool though. So.
yeah, yeah. So there were challenges of the film. I was trying to make, like I said, I was trying to make a personal film with
As they all are, yeah.
with comedians in the role of what the people like single people and lovable, negative people and icomizing record collectors. Those people, I could have found people who knew exactly what I was talking about and could have spoken. And instead, I was talking to people who often had no idea what I was talking about. And the other thing is, and I'm sure you can, attest to this, it's much different interviewing somebody who's never been interviewed than interviewing somebody who's been interviewed 1,000 times. So that's the other thing is all my films were made with people who've never been interviewed, and now he's making films with people who've been on Johnny Carson 100 times. Now, the thing about those people is they might even tell you, and I wonder what Cliff Nesteroff thinks about this, but I think he is not asking them the questions that I asked him. So maybe his experience would be irrelevant on
He's
some
asking
level.
biographical
He's
questions.
asking them to some degree exactly what they want to be asked. So I'm interviewing Norm Crosby, and I want to talk about his parents, his grandparents, about growing up Jewish, what it was like. What did you eat? How were you what were your influences? Now, I've been told by a friend of his, who's my executive producer, when you interview these guys, it'll be such a relief, such a pleasure, such a novelty for them to talk about the things like that rather than the things they've been talking about endlessly their whole life on every talk show. And my experience was no, that's completely
not the case.
Not the case.
Because they were over-prepared, or they just went into rote mode where
because they assume that the most interesting thing in the world involves them knowing famous people. What? I guess. And actually Norm Crosby is a funny case because Norm Crosby in his house has hundreds of showbiz photographs, him with every president, him with Elvis, him with etc. And there's this amazing picture of him with Billie Holiday. Wow. Billie Holiday. And I'm like, you knew Billie Holiday? And he said, I opened for her on her last performance. We were in Chicago. I opened for her Friday night. She died on Monday. Andy Kindler said, as she was dying, she was like, I can't take any more malaprops. But anyway, Norm Crosby told me the story about the first time he met Bob Goulet and then how they became friends and how they continued to work together. And it's like, I don't know, how did you turn the corner to you and Bob Goulet when I'm asking you about being Jewish?
Yeah.
Because they just, it's like you can see them just trying to pull the whole thing back to this rut that they're used to.
So without having seen the film, I imagine that you address these concerns or unhappiness with the interviews throughout the film? Or was that just off camera where you're going, this isn't going the way that I
No,
envisioned.
some of it's obvious in the film
Yeah.
that I had troubles with some of them. That I put that in the film.
Yeah.
I have to
As I
say
would imagine.
that I have a new obsession, which is I would like to rid the world of all the horrible film reviewers there are. So I had at least 3 reviews of When Jews Were Funny essentially say, Zweig is such a bad interviewer that some of his subjects get mad at him.
Mm.
I'm like, dude, if I thought that was a sign of bad interviewing, would I put it in the film?
Yeah.
Exactly. Like Bob Einstein makes fun of me very clearly, and it's very funny, and I fall on my sword. And whatever, I fall on my sword. It's like, for your entertainment, here's Bob Einstein getting mad at me and making a fool of me, and then somebody in the crowd at the Q&A says, "Do you know that guy's making fun of you?" It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
I knew. Like that didn't just sneak it into the film. So I use some of their crustiness in the film, and that it sort of I release it in some ways. So anyway, there's just all this stuff. Like I say, I just keep going back to the same thing. Instead of making this personal film with people that would get what I was saying, I made it with these people that many of whom wouldn't, hoping that I could still make the film that I wanted to make, but give it this extra kick of funny Jewish people, some of whom are stars that you might enjoy seeing. And I didn't think that would work. That's basically what it comes down to. I didn't think that would work because it kind of shouldn't work. Because
Do you mean after you saw what you had?
yeah, even after I saw what I had, I just thought, and then the other thing that I didn't think would work for people was that when you make a film and people are purposely funny, comedians, as you know, sometimes are pretty good at slipping in bits of their act to the conversation as if they're just saying it right then, but they know that that's going to kill because they've said it 100 times on stage. So, when you have people being funny that way, and I left a lot of it in because I like to hear people laugh. But when you make things that are that funny, sometimes what happens is everything else just becomes boring stuff that they listen to wait for the next funny thing. So the emotional, melancholy, nostalgic, mournful part of the story that I was putting in, I thought for a lot of people would just be boring shit till the next joke.
And it wasn't.
It wasn't for this jury, and it wasn't for a lot of people I talked to. Although it was for a lot of interviewers, a lot of critics.
Now, what I find interesting is you're in the film. You're not just talking about professional comedians. You're talking about Jews in real life.
I'm really talking more about Jews in real life.
Yeah. And that's why you wanted to get to their parents and
right. I'm
their
saying
upbringing.
I've just basically, on some level, I'm talking about Jewish humor, the humor of the people, the humor of the street, the humor of at the bar mitzvah or at the deli. And instead of talking to experts on Jewish humor, academics, etc., I talked to Jewish comedians, thinking that, yes, they're comedians, but they're also Jews, and they're also at those same delis as me, and they would have something to say about that, and maybe they'd say it in a funny way. And some of the younger ones do. Like, there's a guy in L.A. that Andy Kindler, who I now consider a friend, turned me on to his friend, Ed Krasnick. You know Ed?
Yeah, I know the name, and I'm trying to think.
Well, Ed, I love Ed. I loved,
Krasnick.
like, when I met him when he walked in the door. So Ed is like late 40s, maybe. He totally got what I was talking about. Totally got it. Andy got it. Mark Maron kind of got it, but he was, confrontational about it. But so the younger generation got it. Even David Steinberg kind of got it. David Brenner kind of got it. I don't. Maybe Bob Einstein even kind of got it. Bob Einstein was very difficult, but he told me one story about something his father did, and it was like, that's perfect. That's
Perfect.
Thank
Well,
you.
his dad was a professional too.
Right. Yeah. Park your carcass.
There's a quote from this book, The Great Comedians by Larry Wilde. I think it was put out in the 70s by Dick Gregory, the famous Jewish comedian. But this is something that always stuck with me when I read it years ago. He said, I think the funniest humor comes from the guy in the street who's not in show business. To be a comic is another form of being a whore. The housewife has sex relations. She's not a whore. A prostitute is because she's selling what everybody else is doing for free. Humor is everyday life, and the funniest thing you're going to hear is from the cab driver or the soda jerk or the guy in the factory. But there's something about the comedian that makes him able to get up and sell it, present it in a certain way.
Well, here's something you're making me think of. I mean, that's the thing about sort of funny Jews when I was a kid. There was definitely there were definitely some Jews who were intentionally funny. They were like stand-up comedians, except they weren't stand-up comedians.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was...
But they had an audience.
Right. But then there were a lot of them that were unintentionally funny. because of that, just their incredibly relentless world weariness.
Mhm.
Like it didn't matter what it was; they were kind of It was bad.
They weren't
Whatever.
funny to everybody, I'm guessing. It must have been a downer to some people.
I don't know. That's the funny thing about. That's the interesting thing to think about because I don't know. No, to me, I don't know. That's to me. If somebody's really put upon over something that isn't that horrible, that's going to be funny to me. You know,
Yeah.
like, yeah, just like, I don't know. I heard a guy in a hospitality suite today. His name is Tony, and apparently he's famous, but I don't know who he is.
Okay.
Tony, and he's British. I think he's a famous director, like a really famous director, but I don't know his name. But anyway, he just sat down and did about 5 minutes of complaining about how his hotel key didn't work. And they sent security and they sent this and they like, kind of, they said to him something about, well, you want security, don't you? Like, and he's like, yeah, but I want security to work for me, not against me, etc. That was hilarious. It was.
But he wasn't.
He wasn't
meaning it
trying to be. No, I think he
intentionally
knew
funny.
that he was being funny, but
But he was
the
really
other-
aggravated.
he was really aggravated about something not important.
Yeah.
I think that is Jewish. That's how Jews change comedy.
But Tony
Is
Is-
British.
not Jewish.
No, but Jews change comedy, and it was adopted by everybody.
Okay. Yeah.
And let me tell you a story that Ed Krasnick told me. Might be apocryphal, but he had no reason to lie to me. He said that these guys, the cool thing about these guys like Andy and Ed, who are in their late 40s, is they all got to know the guys that were on Ed Sullivan because they went to the Friars Club in their 20s and had Henny Youngman and
Yeah.
Milton Berle would be having lunch. Ed knew Alan King, and Alan King told him this story that Ed Sullivan didn't like Richard Pryor. And Alan King said to Ed Sullivan, Ed, he's Yiddish. He's turning it on his inside. He's
Oh,
tearing
like his spirit is.
his spirit.
needed.
He's a Jewish comedian.
Ah.
And then we put him on.
Huh.
So yeah, I mean, it's not what there's no separation anymore between comedians who are Jewish and comedians who aren't Jewish. They're all basically doing the same thing, and it was invented by Jews.
Do you have an opinion on why the Jewish comedian in Canada isn't nearly as prevalent as it is in the United States?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure how true that is because Mark Breslin says that like when he started Yuck Yucks, 70% of the comedians were Jewish. Now maybe 5%. Yes, I do think there's a reason, but this might be true, but then I don't know what to do with the theory. New York is a very Jewish place, even if people aren't Jewish. Everybody from New York could be Jewish. That's true of a lot of American cities. Just the culture seems Jewish. People from Jersey seem Jewish. That's not true of anywhere in Canada.
Not even Montreal.
Maybe a little bit from Montreal, but like people in Regina, no.
Mm-hmm.
Even if like that's why I'm like, even if you're Jewish in Vancouver, you don't read Jewish to me. Even if you're Jewish in Regina.
That's right. Yeah, I heard what you said on Brent Bambury's show about
Seth Rogen.
Seth Rogen. Oh, he's Vancouver Jewish.
Yeah, well, I mean, Vancouver has a Jewish film festival, so I have no.
There you
I
go.
might be wrong, and they're showing When Jews Were Funny actually in
When?
November.
Oh, good. I got to go. I used to play in the Jewish Community Basketball League.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, you're. Anyway, I mean, I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think that it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. So, just to be clear, when I say When Jews Were Funny, I don't mean Jewish comedians are less funny than they were. In fact, I think they're funnier. Like Ed and Andy. I love Andy Kindler. I love Ed Krasnick. I love Judy Gold. I think they're as funny. Judy Gold is 1,000 times funnier than Joan Rivers, if you ask me. And
Joan Rivers is Jewish.
Joan Rivers is Jewish, but I'm saying like the younger Jewish comedians to me are funnier than the older ones. As much as I revered them when I was a kid, when I see them in archival footage now, I'm like, Henny Youngman still makes me laugh. Rodney Dangerfield is still funny.
Have you
but
seen Joan Rivers live?
No.
You should.
Oh, yeah?
She is fearless. She is
Okay.
incredible.
But
still.
anyway, stand-up comedy didn't exist before vaudeville, period. standing and in one, as they say. It's people can make the argument better than me. I decided really not to make the argument in the film, but I will say one thing if people doubt my theory about Jewish comedy. Jews were always good about talking about their own anxieties and fears.
Yeah.
Always. For thousands of years. Very normal. Non-Jews were not good at talking about that. In the 30s, people who are, more historically minded will tell you in the 30s, after the Depression, especially and during and after the Depression, was the first time that Americans were actually feeling such anxiety that it was a relief when the Jew got on stage and said, scared. And that changed. That
They
was
spoke to everyone.
right. And there was like, as Mark Breslin says in the film, they're like, thank you, Jew. Thank you for saying that because we feel the same thing, but we never say it. That's when stand-up comedy changed. Because before then it was pratfalls and banana peels and pies in the face and ethnic humor and dialect humor, like just find out what was funny, what people did to make people laugh before like 1935 or something like that. Nobody was just standing there going, my life is so horrible.
Mhm.
Nobody was making fun of themselves. Always making fun of the other guy, and the other guy was ugly, and the other guy was from another country, and then he slipped on a banana peel and got a pie in the face.
So you're saying now that all comedy is essentially Jewish, whether you're Jewish or not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. There are people that aren't doing that. I don't know who they are, but there are people who aren't standing on stage making fun of their own lives.
Mhm.
Like one of my favorite stories I heard was, Phil Harris.
Yep.
Phil Foster.
Phil Harris was in the Jungle Book.
Phil Foster was.
No, I don't know Phil Foster.
Phil Foster was on Laverne and Shirley. He played like
her
dad or uncle.
Yeah.
So he was a Jewish comedian in the 50s, and he went on stage in this club, killed, and then got fired. And when they asked the owner why they fired him, he said he just talked. He had no act. Right? That's Jewish. Just talk.
Just talking.
Yeah, just talk. Like he had no act. He just talked. That's what Louis C.K. does. Louis C.K. I mean, his comedy is obviously Jewish. It's completely Jewish. Like now, I've heard that he's like 1/4 Jewish. I don't know whether that's true, but it doesn't matter.
Well, they're Eastern European. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to play 1 minute and a half clip. I interviewed a few weeks ago Michael Gelbart. You know him?
I think I met him in
Yeah.
Toronto.
Toronto comic, lives in LA, goes
Tall,
back and forth.
good-looking
guy,
good-looking guy, yeah.
And I
Doesn't look like a comedian.
asked him why he thought there were more Jews per capita in the States in comedy. He had a funny answer here. I
Okay.
just want to play. When you think of great Jewish comedians, usually American, and in Canada, we don't have that history. There's a few, but it's not like in the States.
I think the reason being, get ready for this. This is no. I should edit out my thought on this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Yeah, say it.
In America, there's been a long-standing belief that show business can pay well. And in Canada, show business doesn't pay as well. And I think American Jewish people gravitated to American show business, and Canadian Jews did not gravitate to Canadian show business. I'm not making any...
Yeah, you probably should have edited that out.
Really? Will
But
you
I'm
edit
gonna
that
leave
out
it
for
in.
me?
No, I'm going to keep it.
It's a fact that there are more American Jews in show business than Canadian Jews. Why is that? I don't know.
Send your letters to michaelgelbart.com.
Gelbart.
Gelbart.
I want the thing about Jews edited out of the show. I think it's bad. It is bad, right?
No, it isn't.
I want it out.
It's
I love Jews. I might marry one, but I might not.
Mhm.
We'll have to see who comes along. But I think that the Jews are the best. No, I got nothing on this subject.
Okay, so that's not even controversial. I mean,
But it never
it's
even
not-
occurred to
it's
me.
not. No, you see, the reason that's not racist or something like.
Oh, I see why
like-
he was worried about it.
Yeah, that's not racist because there is no Canadian show business. That's why
Yeah.
there are fewer Jewish comedians because we have no show business at all. Being a filmmaker in Canada is stupider than being a filmmaker in the States. You know, I just won.
More risk.
Not just more risk. There's no, yeah. No risk is basically what it comes down to. Americans worship success. Okay, so a friend of mine I just had coffee with another Canadian filmmaker, and he said, if you won, okay, TIFF is like one of the biggest festivals in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If you won the equivalent of the best Canadian film at TIFF in this, and you were American and you won that in New York or something like that, they'd be stuffing money in your pants now. That's true. In the States, you'd be getting calls from agents. There's all kinds of stories about like filmmakers. There's a filmmaker, his name is Ross McElwee. He made one really great film called Sherman's March and a number of films in a similar style. His style can be somewhat compared to mine, and he was somewhat of an inspiration to me. If you see his films, you know that he can only do what he does and would not be a good fiction director. Nonetheless, because of what he did, he got called down. Like he took meetings in LA and spent time, you know, getting ready to make his Hollywood debut. And they actually ended up making a film about how it didn't work out. That's America. It's like, oh, you had success in documentary? Come on. You can make a real movie.
Here, you get a pat on the back.
No, I mean, here you get a lot of congratulations from people who don't even like you because they feel like, oh, I better be on his side now. But I'm just saying, like, there is no Canadian showbiz. So it's not that Jews don't go into show business.
Nobody does.
Nobody does, right?
Yeah.
Nobody in their right mind would do it. So fewer Jews do it, fewer whatever. Yeah, that's all. But I at this moment, I don't think there is a lower proportion of Jewish comedians in Canada than Jewish comedians in the States. I think right now, the most, 5% of comedians are probably Jewish in Canada and the States.
You think?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know either. I don't know how we can quantify
I don't know
it.
how we can quantify it because I don't know all the young comedians. I mean, the funny thing about stand-up is there's a lot of people who are making some kind of career that we've never heard of.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
We never will hear of. My favorite story from making the film was we interviewed Corey Kahaney.
Saw her last year
at the Friars Club in New York.
Mm-hmm.
When I was leaving, Corey said, come on, I got to introduce you. There's a guy who wants to meet you. I went into the room that he was sitting in. That was like the Henny Youngman room or something like that. I was in a Friars Club. It was really like, oh my God, I'm in the Friars Club. And now a guy at the Friars Club in the Henny Youngman room wants to meet me. So the guy, I can't remember his name, says to me, hey, so they're telling, like really, like it's like my showbiz moment. They tell me you're doing a film about Jewish comedians. You're here in New York. You're not going to interview Modi? I'm like, I never heard of Modi. Who's Modi? Modi. He's the best comedian in New York. How can your people have you here interviewing Jewish comedians and you're not interviewing Modi? He must have said Modi 10 times. Turned out he was Modi's client. No, Modi's manager.
Right.
Couldn't believe I wasn't interviewing Modi, somebody I never heard of.
Somebody no one's heard of, probably.
People have heard of him.
Oh, okay.
So now then it turned out that this guy was like, yeah, my first job was representing documentary filmmakers. Like, yeah, sure, whatever. Yeah, the Maisley brothers. Oh, okay, that's real. And then, yeah, and I produced all of Eddie Murphy's movies. And then you look up in IMDb, there it is. And I owned the Comedy Store or something like that. And now I have one client, Modi. Anyway, we interviewed Modi. Modi was unbelievable. He was hilarious.
Young guy?
Young guy. He's hilarious in the film.
Okay.
He tells the single greatest story about an old Jew that I've ever heard. If you're Jewish, you'll recognize right away he was born in Israel. He has like that, like New York and Israel, like the two most aggressive people in the world, and it's there it is in Modi. But the thing is, I think Modi makes a good living. Why have you never heard of him? Well, Modi does synagogues. Modi does a lot of synagogues. He does a lot of benefits. He can speak fluent Yiddish. He has a show for the Orthodox, for the less Orthodox, whatever. He goes to other synagogue. I mean, there's a whole sort of Catskills tribute night circuit.
He makes a good living.
Yeah, I mean, there's another guy in my film. Have you ever heard of Stewie Stone?
No.
Stewie Stone is on the cover of the 3rd edition of Drew Friedman's Old Jewish Comedians. He's about Robert Klein's age. They're best friends. He also does, if you look up on YouTube, he's doing a show like for Miami Beach Jews, telling the same jokes about Jews coming back to the table and taking the roles, and so there's a lot of outlets. And then at the New York Shul, we interviewed at the benefit, we met 2 guys, a guy named Michael Fine, a guy named Bob something Berg. Again, these guys, they're comedians in New York.
Yeah.
They do
And
whatever.
we won't have heard of them.
They play the Concord, which still exists in the Catskills or was revived. Yeah. So it's hard to say what percentage of comedians are anything, because probably comedians are like icebergs or something. It's like,
yeah.
90% of them are underwater.
Great talking with you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, what
was
time
fun.
is it now?
It is 7 minutes to 3.
Ooh, I better go.
My kid gets out at 3, so I'm going to be late. So I got to go.
Okay. Where?
Thanks, Alan.
You're welcome.
I enjoyed that conversation with Alan Zweig. Hope you did too. And like I say, if you haven't checked out his films yet, do. As he said in this interview, When Jews Were Funny is playing the Jewish Film Fest here in Vancouver in November. I'm going to check it out. And when I can, 15 Reasons to Live. But meanwhile, go watch Vinyl. It's on YouTube. It's on the What's So Funny blog. I posted it today. Next week, we've got an interview with Godfrey, and it is a good one. Got to tell you that. Spoke to him this weekend. All right. See you next week.